Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu Newspaper, and these are the 5 topics that we shall be discussing today. Beginning with a news article on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu relevant for GS Paper 2. No need for extra curbs on free speech of ministers, says the Supreme Court. But what is the context? 2016, an incident of rape in Bulandshahr in Uttar Pradesh. Mr. Akhilesh Yadav was the chief minister. Mr. Azam Khan was the minister. And when this incident of rape was brought to notice, there was a word which spread that a rape has occurred in Bulandshahr. The minister gave a speech and said this is a political conspiracy to destabilize the Akhilesh Yadav government. A case was filed in the court. Initially, Mr. Azam Khan apologized for his comments, for this political comment, for politicizing the... Should the ministers and those who are occupying public posts be held accountable for their speeches? Should there be some extra curb on their freedom of speech and expression? Because under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A of the Constitution, we have the freedom of speech and expression. But this freedom of speech and expression is not an absolute fundamental right. There are reasonable restrictions that can be imposed on your freedom of speech and expression. And there are 8 grounds on the basis with foreign countries, public order, morality or decency, contempt of court, incitement to an offense. There are 8 grounds on the basis of which your freedom of speech and expression can be restricted. The question before the court was, is there a need to impose extra restriction on those occupying high posts, such as the ministers? Should they be subjected to some more reasonable restrictions under the Constitution? Ability. If there is a vote of no confidence against one minister in the Lok Sabha or Legislative Assembly, it amounts to vote of confidence against the entire Council of Ministers. That is what we call collective responsibility, which means Council of Ministers swim and sink together. A vote of no confidence against the Prime Minister means the vote of confidence, no confidence against the entire Council of Ministers. That is why we say if the Prime Minister resigns, it's the resignation of the entire cabinet. If the Prime Minister dies, it is the death of the entire Council of Ministers. So if there is collective responsibility and attributed against the entire Council of Ministers, against the government, these were the 2 key questions to be decided by the Honorable Supreme Court. And this case was heard by 5 judges of the Supreme Court, a constitution bench of the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said by a majority, a consensus was achieved that there is no need to impose extra curbs on minister. Why? Because a minister is giving a speech in his individual capacity. This individual capacity speech cannot be attributed to the entire government. Collective responsibility means Council of Ministers are accountable to Lok Sabha. Council of Ministers are accountable, collectively accountable to the lower house of the parliament, whether it is Lok Sabha or Legislative Assembly. Collective responsibility does not mean that an individual minister's speech can be attributed to the entire Council of Ministers. The Supreme Court said that there is a well-defined convention that when ministers or those holding important positions, they give speeches, they are normally restrained in their speeches. There is no need to impose extra curbs on the minister's freedom of speech and expression. But something spectacular was said by Justice Nagaratna. Yesterday she gave a dissenting judgment in the demonetization case. Today she's saying something even more important. What she's saying if a minister is giving a speech in his individual capacity, it cannot be attributed to the entire government. But if the minister is giving a speech or saying something which is also the policy of the government, then whatever he says can be attributed to the entire government. And for that, maybe we need a law to bring some curbs on the minister's freedom of speech and expression. Long story short, what is this issue? The issue dates back to 2016 when there was an incident of rape in Bulandshahr. The minister is saying that there is a political conspiracy. There's no rape, this is a political conspiracy to destabilize the Uttar Pradesh government. Something else happened in Kerala when a member of the Legislative Assembly gave a misogynist speech against another member, another honorable female member of the Legislative Assembly. And collectively, now the court had to decide whether the ministers, number one, should they be imposed further curbs, restrictions on the ministers' freedom of speech and expression, apart from the 8 grounds that are originally mentioned in the Constitution? Number one. Number two, can we apply this doctrine of collective responsibility to also say that an individual who hold high positions in the society, they are usually restrained in their speeches, but what a minister says cannot be attributed to the government, because the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister does not have the disciplinary control over all the members. But Justice Nagaratna says that hate speeches given by those are government as well. That's what you need to know regarding this topic. Let's look at another topic. Preventing animal cruelty is a duty of the state. Jallikattu, it's basically a Animal Welfare Board of India versus A. Nagaraja. A 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court said Jallikattu is basically, yes, a sport, but at the same time it is a classic example of cruelty against the animals. That is why Jallikattu is banned. Now the Supreme Court has to decide. A larger Supreme Court bench has to decide whether this law, which was passed by Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly, which exempted Jallikattu as an exploitative practice, whether this law is legal or illegal. For that, we need to understand something important. When Constitution talks about fundamental rights under Part 3 of the Constitution, such as right to life, right to equality, we say these fundamental rights are applicable and available to persons, to human beings, not to the animals. So explicitly, Constitution does not give fundamental rights to the animals. Fundamental rights are available to the persons. Over a period of time, these fundamental rights were extended to juristic personalities. For example, companies, for example, boards, organizations, they also enjoy fundamental rights because they are juristic personalities. Now, fundamental rights are available only to the citizens or the juristic personalities. But at the same time, we have Part 4 of the Constitution, which deals with directive principles of state policy. Part 4, capital A, is with fundamental duties. Both these parts talk about compassion for living creatures. Both these parts talk about respecting natural environment, wildlife, forests, and living creatures. But both these parts are not enforceable in a court of law. Directive principles are not enforceable in a court of law. Fundamental duties are not legal duties. Now the question before the court is, when the law was passed in the year 1960, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, when this law was passed in the year 1960, listen to me carefully, this law was not passed because the parliament realized that animals also have fundamental rights. This law was passed with the intention that as individuals, as human beings, we should be compassionate towards living creatures. We cannot exploit them. We cannot impose cruelty and conduct cruelty against wild animals or animals. It was with this logic, not the logic that animals have a fundamental right, but it was the logic that as humans, we cannot do something wrong. We cannot inflict unnecessary pain and suffering on animals. That's how this law was passed, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960. This column says that this law also suffers from some shortcomings. For example, we cannot inflict pain or suffering on animals, but if a new vaccine is developed, we test this vaccine first on the animals. If a new medicine is developed, we test this new medicine on these animals. That means through this process, we also inflict unnecessary pain and suffering on these animals, But nevertheless, this law was passed keeping in mind that animals should not be subjected to cruelty, unnecessary pain and suffering should not be inflicted on these animals. But cruelty against animals, on this subject, both Parliament as well as state legislature has the power to make law, because this item is in the concurrent list. On this item, cruelty against animals, both Parliament as well as state legislature has the power to make a law. So Parliament passed the law in 1960. And after the judgment of the Supreme Court in 2014, the Legislative Assembly of Tamil Nadu is also passing a law, basically saying Jallikattu is a sport, it is not cruelty against animals. And this law, when it was passed by the Legislative Assembly of Tamil Nadu, it was also given to President for his signature, for his assent. Because whenever a law is passed by the state legislature on the concurrent list, if this law violates some of the provisions of the central law, unless and until President gives his assent, this law is not valid. So this law of Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly, which excluded Jallikattu as cruelty against animals, this law was given to President for his assent. President gave his assent in 2017, and now this law is challenged in the Supreme Court. This law is being challenged in the Supreme Court as to whether this law is illegal, constitutional or not. And there are two arguments here. Whenever a law is challenged before the court to test whether the law is constitutional or unconstitutional, the challenge normally applies in two cases, or the challenge is normally on two grounds. Number one, is the legislature competent enough to pass such a law, and is this law violating any fundamental right mentioned under Part 3 of the Constitution? The state government is saying on both these grounds we are right. Why? Because is the legislature of Tamil Nadu competent enough to pass a law on animal cruelty? Yes, because that is part of the concurrent list where both Parliament as well as state legislature has the right to make a law. And we have given this bill to the President for his assent. We have received his assent. So on this ground, we are competent to pass such a law. And it does not violate any fundamental right, because fundamental rights are available to persons. They are not available to animals. On both these grounds, the law is constitutional. But when we look at the argument of the petitioners say, when right to life, and this is a beautiful argument, please listen to me carefully. Right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution, where the Constitution says the state shall not deprive an individual of his right to life and personal liberty. The Supreme Court has interpreted this term life as saying life does not mean physical act of breathing. It's not that individuals are allowed to breathe. That's how right to life is satisfied. Right to life means right to decent environment. And this decent environment means when an individual is living his life, the environment surrounding this individual should also not be disturbed. That means the environment, the wildlife, the animals should not also be disturbed. It is this right to life which is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. So if you impose cruelty on animals, it is basically exploitation, it is basically a violation of Article 21 of the Constitution. And according to this article written by Madras High Court lawyer Suhrit Parthasarthi, he says preventing animal cruelty is a duty of the state. And that is how some delicate balance is to be done by the Supreme Court. He quotes Martha C. Nussbaum, where she writes that we have a duty to protect animals, not because animals and humans are similar, but we should celebrate them despite the strangeness of these animals, despite the differences of these animals, despite the fact that we are different from them. We need to preserve the environment within which an individual is experiencing his life. And that is on this matter that the court will have to take a delicate view. and now the judgment would be delivered at any point in time. Let's see what the Supreme Court will have to rule on this matter. But the long story short is, a law was passed by Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly excluding Jallikattu, considering Jallikattu as a sport which is not cruelty towards animals. Jallikattu was exempted as cruelty against animals. Is this law constitutional or unconstitutional? Depending upon the 2014 judgment of the Supreme Court. Let's wait and watch what the Supreme Court will have to rule on this matter. Then we will have an elaborate discussion on the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. And that is what you need to know regarding this column. Let's jump to another column. A late but right call by Kerala governor. What is the issue? Article 163 of the Constitution. It says there shall be Council of Ministers with Chief Minister at its head to aid and advise the governor. Who shall act on that advice? Whatever advice is given by the Chief Minister and his Council of Ministers to the governor has to accept that advice. And then there is something called doctrine of pleasure, which means all the ministers, they hold office during the pleasure of the governor at the state level. Some statements were given by some ministers in Kerala, and the governor said, maybe if you have given these speeches against me, I will withdraw my pleasure, which basically means I can remove you from the Council of Ministers. There was a lot of furor, lot of controversy at that point in time, where it was argued that governor cannot dismiss a minister without the advice of the Chief Minister. Because although we say all the ministers hold office during the pleasure of the governor, but it's not the personal pleasure of the governor, it's the pleasure of the Chief Minister. Unless and until Chief Minister advises the governor cannot dismiss a minister. Now something else has happened in Kerala. What has happened? A member of the Legislative Assembly, Saji Cherian, a member of the Kerala Legislative Assembly, he was appointed as a minister as well. Then he addressed his party workers and he gave a speech. And in this speech, he criticized the Constitution. It led to a lot of furor, lot of controversy, and ultimately this minister was forced to resign. And he resigned. Now the Chief Minister of Kerala wants Mr. Cherian to be re-inducted to the cabinet. Now when he is to be re-inducted to the cabinet, who can appoint a minister? Governor. Who will administer oath to a minister? Governor. The governor was asked, what is your take? Will you administer oath to Mr. Cherian, who was previously asked to resign? Now the Chief Minister wants him back in the Council of Ministers. The governor said, I will have to take a legal advice, because this is not a simple issue. I'll have to take a legal advice whether I should administer oath to Mr. Cherian or not. But luckily good sense prevailed on the governor, and the governor has said, I will administer oath of office and secrecy to Mr. Cherian. He will be re-inducted to the Council of Ministers. But for the Civil Services Examination, what is it that you need to know from this topic? You have understood the context, but what is it that you need to know from this topic for your examination? Constitution says, if I am a legislator, I am elected as a legislator, I cannot attend the sittings of the legislature, I cannot sit in the legislature, I cannot vote in the legislature without being administered oath. Oath is important. Same Constitution says penalty can be imposed on a legislator if he is taking a seat in the legislature without being administered oath. That means oath is very important. And this oath is mentioned under Schedule 3 of the Constitution. Schedule 3 talks about the oath of office, oath of secrecy, when a person is to be appointed as a minister. So without oath, you cannot sit in the legislature, you cannot vote in the legislature, and there will be penalty imposed if you are participating in the legislative business without taking oath. And the same applies to a minister as well. Minister without taking oath cannot assume his office. What if Mr. Cherian would not have been administered oath of office and secrecy by the governor? Could he have been still appointed as a minister without the oath administered by the governor? The answer to that question is yes. And that is why this topic becomes very important. How? We have a precedent. What is the precedent? Mr. Vasantha Pai, he was a senior advocate in Tamil Nadu. He was also a member of the Legislative Council. Then his term got over. He got re-elected to the Legislative Council again. And when he got re-elected to the Legislative Council, he cannot sit in the Legislative Council without being administered oath. And the oath is normally administered by the chairman of the Legislative Council on behalf of the governor. This time in 1978, there was no chairman of the Legislative Council in Tamil Nadu. Now the governor appointed a pro-term chairman, and this pro-term chairman was given the responsibility to administer oath to Mr. Vasantha Pai. And he refused. Why? He said, I will not take oath from this pro-term chairman. Mr. Governor, you administer oath to me personally. He went and met the Honorable Governor. He explained the reason as well. The governor asked, what is your objection? Why do you want to be administered oath by me directly and not by the pro-term chairman? He said this pro-term chairman, previously when he was the member of the Legislative Council, he gave a speech. And that speech was against the sovereignty and integrity of India. He gave a speech wherein he said that in Madras, we need autonomy. And if the central government is not giving us autonomy, we should do the same thing as Sheikh Mujibur Rahman did in Bangladesh. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman basically led a revolution against the Pakistani establishment, which led to the emergence of Bangladesh as an independent entity. So is this individual basically talking and telling the chief minister that you should do the same thing as Sheikh Mujibur Rahman did in Bangladesh, which goes against the sovereignty and integrity of India? You are basically asking the chief minister to come out of the Union of India, just like Sheikh Mujibur Rahman did in case of East Pakistan, in case of Bangladesh. That is my objection, Honorable Governor. I don't want to be administered oath by this pro-term chairman who gave a speech which is against the sovereignty and integrity of India. The governor told him that you are being too sentimental. Please don't do that. Oath will be administered by the pro-term chairman. Please go ahead. He did not. Then what he did? He looked at the oath mentioned in Schedule 3 of the Constitution, took a printout of it, signed it, and then sent a telegram to the governor that please give me a time on which you will administer oath to me. The governor did not respond. He sent this duplicate copy of this oath mentioned in Schedule 3 of the Constitution, signed it and sent it to the governor. And then governor, who was dilly-dallying, who was not administering oath, ultimately this individual, Mr. Vasantha Pai, he also realized that if I'm taking a seat in the legislature without being administered oath, there can be penalty as well. He approached the court. He was basically asking the court, please validate my oath. Please say that my oath is valid. Governor did not administer me the oath. I did not take the oath from the pro-term chairman. I took a printout of the oath mentioned in the Schedule 3 of the Constitution, signed it and sent this copy to the governor. You please say that this oath is valid because the governor has not administered oath to me. The court accepted this, and even without administered oath by the governor or the pro-term chairman, Mr. Vasantha Pai became the member of the Legislative Council. That's what former judge of the Madras High Court says. If Mr. Cherian was not administered oath of office and secrecy by the governor, all he could have done, took a printout of this oath mentioned in the Schedule 3 of the Constitution, signed it, sent it to the governor, and the oath would have been valid. That is the point that you need to understand from this topic, and that is what this column is all about. Clear? Let's take a look at another topic on the legality of Israel's occupation. What is the context? December last year, that means last month, United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution. Passed a resolution basically asking one of its principal organs, which is International Court of Justice, which is based in Hague, Netherlands, that please give us your legal opinion. What is the legal opinion of yours on Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian land? And whatever verdict is given by International Court of Justice is binding. This resolution was passed by United Nations General Assembly. United States voted against this resolution. Israel voted against this resolution. India abstained from this vote. So what is the context? Last year, last December, United Nations General Assembly is passing a resolution asking the opinion of its principal organ, because United Nations has 6 principal organs. One such principal organ is International Court of Justice, asking International Court of Justice for its views, for its legal opinion. How do we tackle the illegal occupation of Palestinian land by the Israel? And whatever judgment is given by International Court of Justice is final and binding, although they have no mechanism to enforce this judgment. That's besides the point. But what you need to know is some brief history about Israel-Palestine conflict. And stay with me for some time. Let me share very briefly the history of Israel-Palestine conflict. We can trace this conflict back to the Turkish Ottoman Empire, which ruled the entire Middle East from the period 1516 to 1917. Middle East is considered to be the birthplace of 3 Abrahamic religions. Religions such as Judaism of Prophet Moses was born in Middle East. Christianity, whose prophet is Jesus Christ, the Christianity was born in Middle East. Islam, whose prophet is Prophet Muhammad, born in the Middle East. And there is one sacred place, Jerusalem, which is considered to be the sacred place of all the 3 Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism as well. Jews were persecuted in the entire Europe, in Palestinian land as well. It is considered that Jews were initially expelled by the Christians from Jerusalem and other holy sites of Palestine. This was the position of Palestine, historic position of Palestine, when Ottoman Empire was governing the entire Middle East. Then what happened? 1914 to 1918, the First World War broke out, and the Allied powers such as the Britain, France, they won the World War. And in 1920, League of Nations was born. And in 1922, League of Nations is giving Palestine to Britain. That means after the First World War, the entire Middle East was bifurcated into various influences. Some territories given to France, some territories given to Britain, and Britain became the administrator of Palestinian land. That happened in the year 1922. And before 1922, in the year 1917, Balfour Declaration was issued. What is this Balfour Declaration? Balfour was the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary of United Kingdom of Britain. He wrote a letter to Rothschild, who was an important, very influential Jewish member. He wrote a letter to Rothschild, basically giving a public statement that Britain wants a land for Jews, a state for Jews in Palestine. That means in this Palestine, we will have a state for Jews, which will be known as Israel. And then we saw during the British time, when Britain was the administrator of Palestine, a lot of migration of Jews took place into Palestine. Then came the Second World War. United Nations was born. United Nations said there should be a 2-state solution to this conflict. 2-state solution. Palestine should be divided into 2 states. One for Jews, Israel, the other for the Arabs, which is the Palestine. This was not acceptable to the Arabs, and that is how in 1948, the first war broke out between the Arabs and Israel. Arabs, Egypt, Jordan, all these countries in the periphery, they fought a war against Israel, and Israel emerged victorious. So not just the land which was given by the United Nations as part of two-state solution to Israel, even more land was occupied by Israel in this 1948 war. And then came 1967 war, another massive war which led to a decisive victory for Israel. More and more land was controlled and occupied by Israel. Land such as West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip. This is Gaza Strip. Now this is considered to be the Palestinian land under the United Nations two-state solution. And lots of illegal encroachments have been made by Israel. Lots of settlements have been developed and put forward by Israel. So Israel is basically, according to United Nations, occupied the Palestinian land of East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, West Bank. Now the United Nations General Assembly is asking the International Court of Justice that since 1967, this land of Palestine, which is illegally occupied by Israel, and Israel is not vacating this area, tell us your legal opinion. How can we proceed with this situation? Because horrific human rights violations have been committed. We'll have to wait and watch what International Court of Justice has to say on this matter, what is the advice that they will have to give on this matter. Then we will have an elaborate discussion. But this is the brief outline of the Israel-Palestine conflict that you need to know. Is that clear? If that is clear, let's look at the last topic that we are going to discuss. Not all religious conversions are illegal, says the Supreme Court. Article 25 of the Constitution gives us twofold fundamental rights. Now, before we continue with this discussion, let me tell you something. Let me share something with you. I read all the comments that appear in these videos very clearly. And for the past 2 days, I see two extremes. At one extreme, there are students who are saying, "Sir, please wrap up the discussion in 30 to 40 minutes. Another extreme said, "Please extend the duration of this class. We need a holistic discussion of all the topics that we are covering." Now, let me tell you bluntly, I'm not here to do what you want. I'm here to do what you need and what is right. If on a given day, there are topics which we can cover in 15, 20 minutes, there is no need to extend the duration of this class to 30 minutes or 40 minutes. On another given day, if there are topics which require more explanation, holistic explanation, I have to extend the duration of this class because otherwise my conscience will not be clear. I want my conscience to be clear so that I am satisfied that whatever topic I have discussed, I am able to cover it holistically. That is my intention. And unlike other channels, I won't name these channels, we don't waste your time. Waste your time in the sense, as soon as you log into YouTube, you watch our videos on the channel, you won't see an ad. We have not monetized this channel, unlike other channels. Unlike other channels where they ask you to subscribe to their paid programs, they will give you a coupon code. Apply this coupon code, you will get 20, 30, 40% discount on their paid programs. I'm 100% sure that on this platform, neither me nor any of our teacher has ever told you to subscribe to our paid programs. The maximum we have asked is you to like this video, drop in your comments, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, share the links of these classes with your friends and fellow aspirants because that's a validation for us. As teachers, we feel appreciated if the videos are liked, if the comments are favorable. That's the only validation that we need. So we will only ask you to like this video. Even if there are 0 likes, we will still give our best to give you the solid content that we believe is important for you. So we will do everything, not to waste your time, but we will do everything what you need, not what you want, not what you desire. So sometimes we can also extend the duration of this class like we are doing it today, because we have to cover some topics holistically. Now let's come to the point. Not all religious conversions are illegal. Article 25 of the Constitution gives us twofold fundamental right. One is freedom of conscience. Innermost freedom on which there are no restrictions. Absolutely no restriction. My conscience says I want to be a Hindu or a Muslim, on this there can be no restriction by the state. Neither the court nor the state can impose restrictions on my conscience. This is an absolute fundamental right. But once this conscience takes an outward form, once my conscience is clear that I'm a Hindu, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Sikh, or I'm a Jew, then I have the fundamental right to profess my religion, to practice my religion, as well as to propagate my religion. But this right to profess that I'm a Hindu, practice the beliefs, the tenets of Hinduism, or propagate Hinduism, on this there can be reasonable restrictions. That means in the name of public order, in the name of health, morality of the society, there can be restrictions on your fundamental right to profess, practice, and propagate your religion. In the year 1968, a law was passed by Madhya Pradesh Legislative Assembly called Madhya Pradesh Freedom of Religion Act. According to this act, a restriction was imposed. And this restriction was challenged in the Supreme Court. In the year 1977, Reverend Father Stanislaus versus State of Madhya Pradesh. And that is what this judgment, this article also talks about. Reverend Father Stanislaus versus State of Madhya Pradesh. The principal point in this case was, does that mean if I have the freedom of conscience and freedom to profess, practice, and propagate my religion, does that also gives me a fundamental right to convert others into my religion? This was the fundamental point that the court had to answer in 1977. Supreme Court said, fundamental right to propagate your religion does not include the fundamental right to convert others into your religion. If you want to convert others into your religion, tell them the stories about your religion. Tell them the philosophical ideals of your religion, so that you touch their conscience. And if somebody is propagating his religion, which impacts my conscience changes, and I change my religion and I adopt the religion of this propagator, this conversion is valid. But conversion cannot be due to threat. Conversion cannot be through bribe. Conversion cannot be through allurement. You are giving money and then you are making people to convert to your religion. This is unconstitutional. You can propagate your religion, and through this propagation, you can touch the conscience of the people. If their conscience is touched, you can convert them into your religion. But conversion, if it is through allurement, if it is through threat, if it is through bribe, is unconstitutional. Because right to propagate your religion does not include the right to convert others into your religion. Now there is something called conversion by marriage, or what is known as marriage by conversion. There are states such as Himachal, such as Uttar Pradesh, such as Gujarat, such as Madhya Pradesh, which have either passed laws or they are in the process of passing laws, framing laws to curb illegal conversion. And they say this illegal conversion is happening because of marriage. And that is the term used by them known as love jihad. What does that mean? According to them, these are not my views, so don't lynch me for this. According to them, there is a conspiracy where the Muslim men are trapping the Hindu women into marriage with the principal intention of converting them into Islam. That is what they call love jihad. And we have to curb this menace. That is why there is a need to bring in this law. Because marriage by conversion or conversion by marriage should not be allowed. That's how Madhya Pradesh passed a law in the year 2021 called Madhya Pradesh Right to Freedom of Religion Act. According to this act, there was a section, and this section is Section 10 of the Madhya Pradesh Act. According to this section, if I'm an individual who wants to convert, and if there is a priest who is carrying out this conversion, both have to give 60 days of notice to the district magistrate. If I want to convert from my religion to another religion, and if there is a priest who is performing this conversion activity, both have to inform the district magistrate 60 days before. If you are not informing, then this conversion is illegal, and even if you are marrying, that marriage is also not valid. So if you are marrying person belonging to another faith and you are adopting that religion, this marriage is invalid. Why? Because you have to give 60 days of notice before your conversion to the district magistrate, so that the district magistrate can satisfy himself or herself whether there is any threat involved, allurement involved, bribe involved, whether this conversion is because of the conscience has changed. Now, it is this Section 10 of the Madhya Pradesh Act which was stayed by the Madhya Pradesh High Court. Madhya Pradesh High Court said, we will look at the entire law, whether the entire law is valid or not. It will take us some time, but till that time, this Section 10 of the Madhya Pradesh Act is stayed. You cannot arrest anybody for violating the 60-day notice period. You cannot declare such marriages as invalid if they have not followed this 60-day notice period. Now, Madhya Pradesh government approached the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court that a larger public interest is involved. Please look at this law, but please don't impose a stay on this Section 10. Madhya Pradesh High Court has imposed a stay. You please revoke that stay, defreeze that stay. The Supreme Court has said, we will look at this, we will hear your case, but not all religious conversions are illegal. Let's see what the court will have to rule on this matter. Because Madhya Pradesh High Court said, right to marry is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. In fact, this was the question asked in your prelims examination as well. Right to marry comes under which fundamental right? Article 21. That's the right answer. The Supreme Court said in 2017, a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court in K.S. Puttaswamy case had to decide whether right to privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. All the 9 judges said right to privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21. And right to marry, right to bodily autonomy is an intrinsic part of right to privacy. If you're asking people to give 60-day notice to convert, that is violating their right to life, that is violating their right to personal liberty, that is an assault on their privacy as well, which is a fundamental right. Now let's see what the court will have to rule on this matter. Then again we will have an elaborate discussion. That is it for today. These are the 5 key topics that we had to cover today. I have extended my time, or maybe I have not extended much, but these are the 2 questions for your practice for your mains examination. Question number 1. Hate speech denies human beings the right to dignity. Comment on the need for a stricter law dealing with hateful speeches by individuals in powerful positions of the society. Question number 2. Preventing animal cruelty is the duty of the state and citizens alike. Comment. So comment under this video as well. What do you think of these sessions? Like this video if you haven't yet. And let's meet again tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Stay safe.